How's it going, guys, and welcome back to another build video. This one is on my true melee Amara build, One Punch Amara. This is of course a melee focused Amara build in which, as the title would suggest, aims to dispatch most enemies in a single punch. While the Blade Fury and the Face Puncher do work with this build, it is not fully optimized to work with those two weapons, as this is focused fully on actually hitting your enemies. Now of course I'm going to tell you everything that you need to know within this video to make this build work for you. However, if you want even more details and to dive in deep behind every single exact number behind this build and what every single skill does to interact with each other, I would highly recommend you take a look at the recent video I made going over all of Amara's damage formulas to get an even better understanding of exactly what's going on here. But with that out of the way, let's get into the build. So starting with our weapons, this is pretty standard for a melee build, having the Psycho Stabber, the Blade Fury, and the Face Puncher as our main weapons. Blade Fury and Face Puncher I really don't use all that much. These are only just like really good in case of flying enemies or if there's a lot of far away enemies while you're in fight for your life. Otherwise, you can pretty much stick to the Psycho Stabber forever. This is genuinely the only thing that you need. However, it is important to note that while it says 340% melee damage, this is actually 440% melee damage, at least from what I can tell in my testing. So this is a visual bug, and it does actually deal more damage than it says. The same also goes for the Butt Plug. The Butt Plug is a very strong weapon, however, it is unfortunate that it can't be anointed, but this also deals more melee damage than it says on the card. But more than that, when you hit something from behind, you get a 100% overall increase. This multiplies literally everything that you do. This is just doubling your damage. So the Butt Plug can be a very solid option as well, even despite the fact that it can't be anointed. Though, speaking of anointments, on my Psycho Stabber during mobbing, I tend to use 150/90, as this is just your best one-shot potential. The goal is to just one-tap everything that you can. And with 150/90, this applies to your melee damage and makes doing so incredibly easy, especially when you have all of your skills activated. However, if you do find that this kind of feels inconsistent, as it can because you are doing a lot of various other things around you that can hit enemies and drop them below that 90% health threshold, it's not necessary to use this anointment, and instead you can just use ASE melee damage or Phase Slam melee damage, which I tend to put on my shield because that is the bigger one of the two. Then this is the one that I always have active, and I can just swap it out for the 150/90 if I want to. It is worth keeping in mind though that the Phase Slam melee damage and the ASE melee damage do stack for a total of 300% melee damage. However, they can also both roll on your shields or on your weapons. It is important to not use the same one, because while you may think, oh, if you just use two Phase Slam melee damages, that's 400% instead of 300%, anointments that are exactly the same do not stack with each other, and so having two Phase Slams, you'll still only get 200%. So you want to make sure that you are using one of each. We also use Phase Flare for bossing, as it's just the absolute easiest method to do so, which means that you do want to carry around something that has the orb damage increased by 200% for Phase Flare, as after you build up that Phase Flare damage, you can just swap to this and it'll do more damage. While it isn't necessary for this to be a Guardian Angel, and while even this anointment often isn't necessary for most bosses, the Guardian Angel will just boost Phase Flare's damage to an insane degree and is how it can actually take on a lot of different raid bosses as well. While this isn't necessary for a majority of bosses that you'll end up farming, this is necessary if you want to take on some of the toughest content in the game. I also carry around a Jitsev just for debuffing, however this isn't totally necessary to use. Coming to our gear though, starting with our class mod, you do want to use a Muse, specifically one that has a +3 into Illuminated Fist. This ends up giving you a total of 4 out of 1 into Illuminated Fist for that 300% total melee damage, which is just absolutely crazy. Unfortunately, this has actually since been patched. For the most part, you can actually still farm a 3 out of 1 Muse if you go into offline mode, as that change was only introduced in a hotfix, so if you don't apply that hotfix and load up without an internet connection, you can still get a 3 out of 1 Muse. While the extra points into Illuminated Fist are the most important part of the Muse, it is also very nice to get the Muse damage orb, as not only can it also help to freeze even more enemies, but the damage on it is actually pretty damn good as well. It will definitely kill things on its own. For the passives, you genuinely want melee damage and splash damage, action still damage and action still cooldown cooldown rate are also very good options as well. But again, the biggest thing for your Muse is just that 3 out of 1 into Illuminated Fist. And then for our shield, you want a low level Brawler Ward, as this gives you a shit ton of melee damage when it is depleted, so you want it depleted as often as possible. There are ways of getting a level 1 ward, there's plenty of tutorials on how to do that out there. However, while this one is only level 38, it is still low enough that it is pretty much constantly broken anyways, so I haven't really felt a need to go get a fully low level one. For the shield though, you can also use the Frozen Snowshoe with an Ass Break anointment, as this will just instantly freeze everything surrounding you. And the benefit of this is that you can easily get even more Unweave the Rainbow procs than you otherwise would be, which can be very good. However, I tend to just prefer the Brawler Ward anyways. Then of course for a grenade, I use either a Fish Slap or an Its Piss. The Fish Slap is just stupid high damage, as it gets Groundbreaker and all your melee damage bonuses, so carrying around various elements of that is probably ideal. However, the Its Piss can also be a good option if you don't want to use the Fish Slap and just want to debuff enemies. The Its Piss is another one that is very good to get at a low level so you don't hurt yourself with it. On this, I just use ASE Radiation, as it's good elemental coverage since I mainly use cryo damage as my element, and because it's really the only grenade anointment that helps us too much, so it's kind of just the best option, but this doesn't really matter too much. But for our relics, we actually have quite a few options here. The one that I find to be the best is by far just various stone static charges, so either Firestone, Corrosive Stone, Cryo Stone. I carry around a bunch of these just to swap out whenever I need to, but the stones give you bonus elemental damage on your melees, and so does the static charge. While it does say you need to slide for this, you do get the static charge on every single one of your melee hits, and not only is it bonus shock damage, but it also chains to nearby enemies. Your other options though are you can also use a Stone Victory Rush, as the Victory Rush applies to your melee damage, or if you find that survivability is an issue for you, you could either replace the stone prefix with a Knife Drain, or you could go for an Auto Idol instead, but I don't usually find that too necessary. For the passives you want to look for on your relics, AoE damage is very good, as it interacts quite well with body and mind. Various elemental damages is also very good, as you are dealing a lot of different elements at a time. And of course, melee damage is another very strong one here. So for our action still, we use Phase Slam, as this is just the best for proccing ASEs and giving us large AoE on our action still. However, it's not very useful for bossing, which is why for that I swamp to Phase Flare, as this just outputs a stupid amount of fucking damage, and is what lets us actually do raid bosses. Now, since we are using a lot of ASE elements, this can be difficult to proc before using Phase Flare for bossing. However, if you're far enough in the air and you activate Phase Flare, it will instantly cancel out and it will activate ASEs. For primary element, I usually use Cryo, but this is worth swapping out when you're going against specific bosses, as since in a lot of boss fights it can be difficult to proc Clear the Mind before you actually start laying into the boss itself. The reason we use cryo damage though is because not only is it just a very strong element, but frozen enemies take 3 times the melee damage, which as a melee build is just a very nice bonus to get. And then for the augment, I tend to use Expedite, as it is very important to keep our action still up, but it's not super necessary as there is Combo Breaker. I just find that you can sometimes have some dry streaks with Combo Breaker, which to make Expedite a little bit more helpful. However, it's not super necessary and you could use any of the other augments that you have unlocked. I just think Expedite is the best of what we do unlock. Now coming to our stills and starting with our most important tree, the purple tree. This is pretty standard for a melee build. Of course, we're getting No Mistakes in Nature for that melee damage, Heavy Rain because splash damage will boost our body and mind procs. We then take Unweave the Rainbow. Because we are using the cryo element as our main element, you will be freezing enemies often, and Unweave the Rainbow gets Mayhem scaling, meaning that the melee damage that this pulls from, that 33% of it, gets multiplied by 31 times. So this skill can be very strong, and what makes the Snowshoe a good option. You only really need 1 point into Ebb and Flow, as getting 21% of the damage dealt back as health is pretty much going to bring you back to full every single time. That is an insane percentage of lifesteal for a single point. Granted, it's on kill, but that is still very good. Combo Breaker is a very important still just for keeping your action still up. Joyful Freedom is just very strong melee damage. Same with Burn Both Ends. This applies to your melee damage, as that damage is actually elemental damage, but it also applies to non-elemental damage. It's weird, but it applies to pretty much everything. Then of course we take Body and Mind to gain those splash damage bonuses and to just have a little bit of AoE on our attacks. And Free the Soul, because not only is this just a very good source of damage because it gets Mayhem scaling, but it is also another very good source of freezing enemies for more Unweave the Rainbow procs. And then finally we take Clear the Mind just to remove any sort of elemental damage resistances and let us have an even better time with using that cryo damage as our main element. Of course, this only procs on kill though, so when you're bossing, you do want to still swap your main element to match whatever that boss's health bar is. And coming to our second biggest tree, the green tree, we take Clarity and Samsara for far more survivability. Samsara might seem a little weird because it does give you gun damage. While this does boost the Phase Puncher and the Blade Fury, it's not really why we take it. It's mostly taken for that health regen because this health regen, especially combined with Clarity, is incredibly strong. Samsara is also why I prefer to use Phase Slam over Fracture. While Fracture is an option and it is a little bit of a smoother option because it kind of takes you out of the fight less, Phase Slam just lets you build up even more Samsara procs way easier instead of you needing to have a large crowd to fire Fracture into. Then of course Arms Deal just for more splash damage onto Body and Mind. Mindfulness, as movement speed is very strong in a melee focused build from getting to one enemy to the next. Find Your Center, as this is just a huge melee damage boost at 100%, plus it gives you increased melee range, which is not only good for normal meleeing, but it's also very good for when you're in fight for your life. This will let you slap some shins that you otherwise wouldn't be able to reach to get out of it. We then need to dump 3 points somewhere to get further down the tree, which I tend to just put it into Helping Hands because not only does this still just look cool visually, but I just find the damage reduction to actually be a little bit better than putting the 3 points into Root to Rise, and unfortunately we can't really put them into personal space as this is only gun damage and doesn't actually apply to our melee damage. But really you can put these anywhere that you'd want. And then dump 5 points into Jab Cross. However, you could do 4 points here and 1 point into Guardian Angel. I do think Guardian Angel is worth that extra 1 point just because it can help you out a hell of a lot, but it isn't really needed unless you're not using the Phase Puncher or the Blade Fury at all, which I just wouldn't super recommend anyways. And then we grab the Capstone Blitz, which not only gives us increased melee damage on the actual melee override itself, but this is also another 100% bonus melee damage overall. So this is very worth getting. Now coming to red, this is a smaller skill tree, but perhaps one of our most important, as this is where we put that 1 point into Illuminated Fist to get that 4 out of 1 for that 300% melee damage. This is just absolutely fucking cracked due to that Muse, but it's also even good without a Muse as it does just convert your melee damage into your action skill element for more elemental damage boosts, which is why we pick up Tempest as this gives us that elemental damage boost. Up here you can really put these 5 points anywhere. I just throw them into Anima as that damage kind of feeds into Groundbreaker a little bit more. While it's not much, I find it's just the best of these options. However, if you do plan to shoot melee damage more often, then Infusion can definitely be pretty good. Otherwise, I would just keep it into Anima. And then after all that, you're left with 3 more skill points. I put them into Rush just because I like Rush. I like that skill damage. However, you can really put it anywhere. And honestly, after just looking at it, I'd probably swap these to Atman because this is just a constant skill damage boost that is the exact same percentage as you get from having the 3 points in Rush. But again, you could put these anywhere that you want. But that's gonna about do it. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, definitely consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, all that. Down in the description will be a link to my Twitch channel where I'll be live right after this video goes up, and just below that is a link to my Discord server where you can come and join and hang out. But with that being said, I hope to see you guys in the next one.